I have a mother who lives alone. Thinking about such a mother, I consulted my husband about wanting to live near my parents' house. I won't live near your parents' house. You should do with my parents. He rejected it with a single blow. He ignored other people's feelings and insisted only on his own opinion. It's like that? To overcome this unresolved feeling, what actions did I take? My name is Amelia, 30 years old. I live with my husband, David, and our 6-month-old son, Harry. My husband and I work at the same company. Although we are in different departments, we often collaborate on projects, and we have some common acquaintances. During our wedding, we were greatly blessed by our colleagues, and I myself was determined to be happy. Initially, the two of us lived in the apartment where my husband resided, but it was cramped, so we discussed moving. Since we wanted to have children eventually, we decided to move to a moderately spacious apartment, with the idea of considering whether to build our own home later on. While searching for properties on my smartphone, I casually spoke to my husband. You know, even if we have a child, I don't want to quit my job. In response to those words, my husband smiled and replied, Amelia, you really love your work. You can do whatever you like in that regard. But the desired area, the competition rate for nurseries seems quite high. When considering going back to work, we need to think about that aspect too. Well, yeah, I guess that's true. But we'll figure something out, right? David casually tinkered with his smartphone and murmured with apparent disinterest. To him, I proposed my long-held idea. You know, there's something I've been thinking about for a while. What is it? For the sake of any unforeseen circumstances, I want to live near my parents' house. Huh? Why? Well, you know, my father passed away a few years ago, and now it's just my mother, right? If something happens, I want to be able to rush over quickly. Your mother seems healthy. It's not something to worry about right now. That may be true for now. But thinking about when we have children, I think it would be better to have supportive people close by, I said. In response to that opinion, my husband gave a blatantly reluctant reaction. I will continue while hoping to get some understanding. If it's just the two of us raising the child, wouldn't it be quite challenging? If my mother lived nearby, it would be easier without burdening David. No, impossible. Huh, why? Well, if we lived near your parents' house, we would have to meet your mother frequently, right? It would be a hassle. That might be true, but I'll try my best not to inconvenience David. When we have a child, you won't be able to work temporarily, and we'll be living off my income, right? So, why should I have to be even more considerate? Well, that's... I fell silent, and my husband coldly interjected. Anyway, I won't live near your parents' house or anything. But, when you're pregnant, you won't be able to pay rent or living expenses, you know? Yet you still want to have everything arranged in your surroundings. Don't you think that's presumptuous? Wait, what's with that tone of yours? It's true that I won't be able to work when I'm pregnant. But does that justify such a negative response? As a married couple, don't we have to strive and cooperate with each other? I couldn't comprehend my husband's words and actions. But even if I said something more, it wouldn't lead to a positive outcome. I've recently registered our marriage. I don't want to argue in a situation like this. I understand, let's drop it. With those words, I left the room. I couldn't bear this atmosphere any longer. Afterward, I gave up on living near my parents' house and decided to live in an area close to both of our workplaces. After the move, both our jobs and our relationship were going reasonably well, and we were leading relatively peaceful days. It was one day, during such a time, when I found out about my pregnancy. Although I felt a bit guilty, because work was going smoothly, my child was still my top priority. Considering handover and other factors, I worked until the very last moment before maternity leave. Since entering maternity leave, I had more time for myself, and I started visiting my mother more frequently. Around this time, my husband was working late almost every day. If I gave birth like this, I would definitely have to handle childcare alone. However, since it's my first child, I have no experience with anything, and I have various worries. One day, while visiting my mother at my parents' house, I let slip my true feelings to her. "Mom, I'm really excited about this child being born, but I'm even more anxious." "What's wrong, Amelia? That's unlike you, isn't it? You have David with you." "Well, David seems busy with work. The other day, I asked him, could you take some parental leave, even just a little? He yelled at me. As a man, how could I do such a thing?" As I explained, my voice trembled, and my mother looked worried. Seeing her like that, I decided to express my feelings clearly. "Hey, Mom, when this child is born, would it be okay if I come back here for a while?" "Well, let me think." My mother tilted her head and contemplated for a while. "At first, it might be tough, and it's a bit. For me to come to your place every day, right? For me, it would be more helpful if Amelia comes to our house." "Really? Is it okay for me to stay?" "Of course. I'm happy to be with my grandchild, and there's nothing more joyful than being able to support my daughter." "Thank you, Mom. When I go back today, I'll talk to David too." By confiding my anxieties to my mother, my heart suddenly felt lighter. Right, I should talk to David properly. Child rearing is also something we need to think about seriously as a couple. That night, I told my husband about the incident with my mother. However, his reaction was different from what I had hoped for. "What? Go back to your parents' house? Are you kidding?" "I'm serious." I leaned forward, trying to persuade my husband. "At first, everything will be new and uncertain, and I need to rest for a month after giving birth. I don't think I can manage household chores. That's why I want to go back to my parents' house for a while." "That's obviously not going to work." "What about my meals? The laundry? Who's going to do them?" "Well, couldn't you do your best and handle them for a while?" "What? I'm working outside, and on top of that, do I have to do housework, too?" "You're being too cruel." "Even if you say that." As I struggled to find a response, my husband let out a deep sigh. "I got it, so I should help, right?" "Huh? Help?" "That's right. Child rearing, Child rearing and household chores for the first month after giving birth. I'll support you, right? If we do that, there's no need for you to go back home, right?" "Well, I guess so, but..." "Okay, then it's decided. Since I'll help, there's no need for you to go back home. This conversation is over. I understand. Although I wasn't completely convinced from the bottom of my heart, there's nothing better than being able to raise a child together as a couple. I had some concerns, but I'll trust my husband's words. I gave up on going back home and called my mother to inform her about it. I see. I was looking forward to it, so it's a bit disappointing. But it's a good thing, isn't it? David said he would help, right? Yeah, but I thought it would be reassuring, because you have experience raising children, Mom. There are many couples who start from scratch, without going back home. Since David will support you, both of you should do your best. Yeah, I understand. As I was about to hang up the phone, my mother stopped me. Oh, and what is it? If something happens, tell me right away, okay? I'll always be on Amelia's side. Mom. Thank you. First, I'll do my best with David. To avoid worrying my mother, I have to do my best. And so, I made up my mind to dedicate myself to raising our child with my husband. Several months later, our first son was safely born, and the whirlwind of child-rearing began. As promised, my husband cooperated to some extent. But that meant something like doing some light shopping on his way back from work, and taking out the garbage that I had gathered to the designated area. However, when it came to child rearing, my husband adamantly refused to get involved. He never even changed a diaper, let alone prepared a bottle of milk. I was also exhausted from the unfamiliarity of child rearing, so I didn't feel like complaining. And so, this kind of child-rearing life continued for about half a year. One evening, after putting my son to bed and returning to the living room, my husband arrived home. I'm home. Welcome back. I'll quickly make dinner, so please wait a bit. Huh? Right now? Couldn't you at least warm something up? You're so inefficient. There's no other choice, right? Harry just fell asleep. Even though it's been half a year, can't you even properly put him to bed? What? Never mind, I'll take a bath first. Make sure the food is ready by the time I'm out. Saying that, my husband left the room. What was that? Who does he think he is? He doesn't help with child rearing at all, and yet he expects perfection from me. Frustration built up, and I felt the urge to take it out on something. But I couldn't wake up my son, who had just fallen asleep. I held myself back. 30 minutes later. After getting out of the bath, my husband started eating dinner silently, without even saying bon appetit. As I was astonished by his attitude, "Oh, by the way, I have something to tell you," my husband called out to me. Something? What is it all of a sudden? Today, I received a call from my dad. Mom had a fall and her leg seems to be paralyzed. What? Your mother. According to my husband, his mother had a serious fall while out shopping with a friend, and she was taken to the hospital by an ambulance. Even after several hours, her legs still wouldn't move, and the doctor diagnosed her with a possible need for caregiving. I see. Well, your father-in-law must be going through a lot. To be honest, I was more concerned about my father-in-law than my mother-in-law. It seemed like my mother-in-law never liked me from the beginning, and her attitude during our marriage introduction was cold. Even when I announced my pregnancy, she casually said, "I don't want a girl, you know?" That's the kind of person she was. In contrast, my father-in-law was the one who reprimanded my mother-in-law, and he always stood up for me. If anything happens, don't hesitate to consult with me. If it's okay with me, I'll support you. Every time we met, my father-in-law encouraged me with those words. If my stay-at-home mother-in-law couldn't move, my father-in-law must be going through a lot as well. As I recalled the events at my in-laws' house, my husband uttered unbelievable words. And so, I came up with a great idea. What is it? Let's live with my parents at our family home. Huh? Don't you think it's a good idea? I'm worried about my mom, and Amelia isn't working right now. If we live together, it will reduce my dad's burden, and I think he'll be happy. Wait a minute. You're joking, right? The reason I took time off work is for Harry's childcare. I can't suddenly agree to living together. But it's been half a year already. You should have some flexibility. Right now, my mom is the top priority. Can't you understand that much? Is he serious about this? When I suggested living near my mother, he flatly refused. Only when it's convenient for him. My husband isn't the type to frequently visit his parents' house, so it was fine until now, but living with that mother-in-law is no joke. I know my husband. If we live together, he'll side with my mother-in-law and treat me harshly. I was unable to bear it any longer and expressed my dissatisfaction. Don't mess with me. When I asked to live near my family, you denied it so easily, but it's okay for you? Huh? What's that supposed to mean? Your mother-in-law is healthy, right? But unlike David's parents, my mother lives alone, you know? If something happens, you won't consider my anxieties, will you? Shut up! Listen carefully. You married me and became my wife. Just shut up and do as you're told without talking back. At that moment, the faint affection for my husband vanished in an instant. Not only did he fail to understand my feelings, he didn't even treat me as an equal. With someone like him, I couldn't continue the marriage any longer. When he saw me falling silent, he thought I agreed. My husband blurted out these words. Anyway, living together is already decided. I'll try to move as soon as possible, so please pack up your things by tomorrow. I understand. You should have just obediently listened from the beginning. After finishing his remaining dinner, my husband went back to the bedroom without clearing the dishes. The next day, taking advantage of my husband leaving for work, I packed the bare minimum and left the house. Of course, it was only for me and our son. Upon returning to my parents' house with my son, my mother was initially surprised, but she kindly accepted us after hearing the circumstances. When my husband returned from work and realized that my son and I were not home, he called me on the phone. Hey! Where are you right now? Where? At my parents' house. What? What are you doing without my permission? Come back home right now. Well, Harry is already asleep, and it's impossible for me to come back now. Besides, I don't intend to return. What did you say? I was unusually rebellious and was shouted at by my husband over the phone. Listen here. If you don't come back immediately, we're getting a divorce. Are you okay with that? A divorce? That's right. I told you. Moving to my parents' house, remember? If we get divorced now, you'll be unemployed and that would be troublesome, wouldn't it? I couldn't see his face, but I could sense my husband's smugness from his tone of voice. I coldly retorted to him, "It doesn't really bother me, though." "What?" "As for the divorce, we don't have any objections on this side." "Send the divorce papers over here, will you?" What are you saying?" "If we get divorced, you'll be the one in trouble, won't you?" If he uses accusing tone, does he think I'll obey him? I was genuinely disgusted by my husband's shallow thinking. "If you're moving back to your parents' house, go ahead by yourself." "I'm not going." "What? Do you think such a thing would be allowed?" "I don't need your permission, because we're getting a divorce, you see." Is there a need to listen to the words of a complete stranger? Who are you talking to like that?" To my husband, who still looked down on me at this point, my patience reached its limit. "Enough! Who the hell do you think you are? How much more will you belittle people and be satisfied? I didn't marry you to become your slave. Stop treating women as fools." What's wrong with you, Amelia? Calm down. Calm down? After being treated like this, I can't stay silent. If we can't support each other as a married couple, I don't need a man like you. Divorce? Fine. I'll gladly oblige. Live alone in your parents' house. Don't you dare involve me in this again." With that, I hung up the phone decisively. Despite the persistent phone calls from my husband afterwards, I ignored them all. And then, this time, I started receiving creepy Romeo emails from my husband. "Amelia, I can't live without you. We don't need to live together, please come back." "Understood, let's live with your mother at your parents' house as a family of 3. 1 month later, his Romeo emails abruptly stopped, and he agreed to the divorce without warning. All of this was thanks to my father-in-law. As a result of my husband complaining to my father-in-law about the situation, he ended up being scolded instead. "Listen, David, cohabitation is not something that should be unilaterally imposed." "But, Dad..." "Shut up! You should know more about the world. That's why your wife ran away from you. Pathetic." My father-in-law, who shouted at my husband, ordered him to sign the divorce papers. My husband doesn't seem to oppose his father, and, reluctantly, my husband agreed to the divorce. I submitted the divorce papers that were sent by mail, and finally became free from each other. Afterward, I received an apology from my father-in-law. "Amelia, I'm truly sorry. My idiotic son must have caused you trouble, right?" "It's okay, Father. It's already in the past. You, on the other hand, live your own life. Thank you for everything until now." I cannot thank my dutiful father-in-law enough. I owe my current situation to him. On the other hand, as for me, I'm working as a single mother and struggling with raising my son. With the help of my mother, I'm dedicating myself every day to gradually become a better mother. Just because you're married or just because you're a couple, it doesn't guarantee happiness. Even without a husband, just when having my beloved son and my mother by my side, I am perfectly happy.